SPED cohort training. This month's topic is dismissal and exiting, which is kind of a awesome topic because we don't get to do it very often, but we should make sure we're celebrating those times that it does happen. Maybe it needs to happen a little more often for some children, right? So we'll go through what the difference is between dismissing and exiting special education students, and then kind of like the process for doing both, and then even looking at like on SPED forms how you decipher between a dismissal and an exit, and kind of what you do from there. At any point, if you have questions, you can either put it in the chat or raise your hand and I can call on you. I'm fine with that too. And then at the end, we'll have more time for question and answers. So even if it doesn't pertain to dismissal and exiting, because this isn't a super lengthy topic, we will definitely have some time for just general questions that you may have as well. All right, we will get started. So the two terms dismissal and exit, there's definitely a difference between the two. So a dismissal is when a student is reevaluated and found to not meet disability criteria for special education, or when they no longer have a need for individualized or specialized instruction. Exiting happens when students transition from ECSE services to kindergarten services, or if parents revoke consent, or if they're graduating or aging out. So exiting has a few different varieties of what we constitute exiting versus just dismissal. All right, so dismissal from service. When a team is looking at potentially dismissing a student from special education services, this is what you would want to kind of consider when you're looking at this. So the student is achieving and maintaining their goals at expected grade level without any modifications or big accommodations. The student's achievement review, academic review supports their grade level performance. So standardized testing, grades, things like that support that there's no longer a need. The student's behavior review report supports their age level performance. So, there's not extensive discipline referrals anymore. If they have a point sheet, that data is looking at like they're really reaching their goals on a consistent basis. And then the students has no other areas of need or concern addressed by the team, parents, or teachers. I apologize, that is my phone and I can't mute it. So the steps to this dismissal. So if you have a student that you're looking at, you've considered all of those points in the previous slide, then you're going to, at SST, looking at creating an evaluation plan. So just like, sorry, my office is apparently making all sorts of noises. 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. So at SST, you're going to look at creating that evaluation plan. So you're going to make sure you're addressing all current and possible areas of concern. So we really look at dismissals as you test into special education and you test out of special education. So an evaluation is necessary when looking at dismissing from services. So then you evaluate. So after gaining consent, you begin the process. You either review information, you might conduct some new assessments, you gather all the needed and necessary information, and then again, being a student, an evaluation results meeting is not mandatory or required. You can offer that meeting to parents, but it really, if they're not continuing to qualify, it's really, would be easy to just have a phone call conversation with the family, and if everyone's in agreement, you wouldn't necessarily have to have that meeting. So then you would send that finalized evaluation report home with the prior written notice stating that they are now a general education student and their needs are met in the regular classroom. Simple as that. And then you will kind of touch on this a little bit later in SPED forms, and you'd want to make sure that you choose that status end drop down in their setup page that the IEP was terminated within that school year. So then it deactivates them on SPED forms, and that then you would want to make sure that you're updating your MARS. exiting from service?
So, with exiting from service, so I wanted to put in some specifics about ECSE because this is a common thing that we're using as we're talking about the transition from ECSE into kindergarten. So, one of the things that we do in exit ECSE is to complete the child outcome summaries. So, a child outcome summary is a 7 point rating scale used to determine the extent to which a child's functioning on each outcome is appropriate given their age and whether or not progress was made towards that goal. You complete a child outcome summary form at the entrance of Part C and B, exit from Part C, and preschool special education. So, those are all of the times that it's reported to MDE. The areas that a child outcome summary covers are positive social emotional skills, acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, and use of appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. Part of doing a form and exiting out of Part C or early childhood special education is also completing an EDHI, which is an early hearing detection and intervention form, which is specific for students who are receiving DHH services or have other hearing losses. So, the purpose of doing this is basically to identify strengths and weaknesses in service delivery. And then we go ahead and inform stakeholders of programs to assess effectiveness, provide info for policymakers, to adjust funds, and meet federal requirements. So, although exiting ECSE does not always mean that the student is no longer on an IEP or IFSP, but it's an exiting formality that happens when you are going on to kindergarten or from Part C to Part B.
All right, so another way a student exits from special education is when they graduate, so the end of their senior year, or if they age out. So they might, continue on until they're 19 or 20 or through their 21st birthday. When they do either one of those things, you need to make sure you're completing a summary of performance and the prior written notice that goes with that, and then they get their diploma. We did touch on some of that stuff at our secondary transition training. So if you need help on, needing a refresher on the summary of performance and things like that, you can check out that training. All right, so revocation of consent. This is what this is that the all or nothing discontinuation of IEP services. So when a parent requests, it does not have to be a written request. It can be via phone call or text message, email, in person at a meeting. However, parents want to request that they are no longer consenting to have their child receive special education services. Once you receive that request, it's probably a good idea to explain to the parents and make sure they're understanding what they're asking for, that all services end and accommodations, modifications, all of those supports that their student is currently getting will end once we receive that consent. There are two forms that you would need to send to the parents and make sure that you receive consent for, and that would be the prior written notice, revocation of consent, and the revocation of consent from special education agreement. Both of those are found on SPED forms, and the next slide will show you exactly where those are. Once you receive consent or the 14 days go into effect, services will discontinue. The only time you absolutely have to have that signature on the revocation of consent is if it's a homeschool family that are not wanting services anymore. Then it's really important that we collect or we obtain that signature. But if it's a typical parents now just requesting that their child is no longer receiving services within the public school, it says right on that form that after 14 days, this automatically goes into effect. So, and then you would want to make sure you're updating your MARS information once they exit that way as well. So on SPED forms, sorry, the screenshot's a little bit blurry, but here's the location for those two forms. It's under the dismissal tab, and then you send both the revocation of consent and then the prior written notice revocation of consent. And those are really nice because there's really, other than the date, there is no information that the case manager has to fill out. They're auto-populate or pre-filled. What word am I trying to look for?
That information is provided for you.
Thank you, Lauren. Struggling. Yes, so there's no additional information you have to provide. It's just basically the date, and that would be it. Right. And then I just wanted to show another screenshot of on that setup page under status. If that is the route the parents are choosing, you just select that parent revoked consent for services, and that would again deactivate them on SPED forms, and then making sure you're updating that MARS document, or however your district does it, electronically or a Google form, however that works. We included a link to MDE's like Q&A on high school graduation, diplomas, and aging out of special education services. It's just a nice resource for you to reference if you work with that age group frequently. It just gives some good kind of basic info about that.
Do you want me to click on it at all, or allow people to look at that if they choose?
Actually, go ahead and click on it, Lauren, because it wouldn't let me, because the Q&A is actually like PDF, like Adobe PDF. So the link will take you to the MDE's page. You have to switch. I'll have to share that screen then.
All right, is it showing?
Yep. Okay. And then it's just the top link. You would just click and then it'll pop up, but it wouldn't let me link directly to the document. So, but there's some other useful Q&As that you can reference from that link as well. Okay. Thank you. If you have never checked out the MDE's like Q&As, they're actually quite helpful. They provide a lot of useful information, so that link might be a great resource for you to bookmark.
And I just want to pop in here for this document or for any document that you might access on MDE. It is extremely helpful if you use the Command F control if you have a Mac to type in the keyword that you're looking for. And then it's going to bring you to every spot in that document that might contain the answer to the subject you're looking for and save you a lot of time as well.
Thanks for that tech tidbit, Marissa.
It's all I got.
All right. All right.
Oh, don't forget secondary dismissal.
Oh, thank you. So I just wanted to touch base. Like I said earlier, I thought of this, it was an afterthought, and I apologize. So just wanting to make sure that everyone is understanding the process for when you're dismissing from a secondary disability. So say the student is SLD, but they also are speech, that you do not have to evaluate to dismiss them from those services. That would be through the IEP process, typically at an IEP meeting, but you could, connect with parents and do it through an amendment as well. But that's also would be the process you would take on that.
I have a question on that then.
Yeah.
So is there, because I do that a lot, I'll go off as I'm a speech pathologist and I'll go off, but it always just feels like, what else? Parent agreed and it's no longer in the IEP, so there is no other paperwork.
I would just make sure it's documented in like the proposed actions on the prior written notice that you're proposing to dismiss from speech, which I'm And that
Well-
really is the only place you have to do it at.
And then what happens then the next time that student is evaluated? Then, because they often say, well, Paulette, do you need to come back on and evaluate? But I shouldn't have to unless a
Nope.
new need has been identified, correct?
Correct. Yep, you're correct. Nope. Once
Thank
they're dismissed, yeah, and if there's no other needs for that, no, you would not need to get back on. Otherwise, you have a lot of evals to be a part of again.
Yo-yo. Yeah, and keep going. Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? About anything? Doesn't have to just be on our topic. That's okay. That one was kind of short and sweet, but there's not a lot to it. Yeah, and then we will upload the recording and the Google slide, and then that CEU link will be live within a day or two. I think typically Zach tries to get it on there. So, yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.